The first sign that something was wrong wasn't the shouting, it was the silence that followed it. A silence so thick it wrapped around the dorm like a warning. On Rikers Island, silence didn't mean peace. It meant control. And control almost never belonged to the people wearing uniforms. If stories like this fascinate you, hit subscribe, because this one only gets darker. It started with Dorm 3 East, a unit that was supposed to house low-level detainees awaiting court. But anyone who stepped through those doors knew immediately that the Department of Correction wasn't calling the shots in there. The moment new arrivals walked in, they were met with a row of eyes, 14 gang members sitting on metal-framed beds that weren't theirs, watching like security cameras with pulses. No officer interrupted. No officer even looked in. The dorm had become its own kingdom. At the center of it sat a young man named Chemo, 22, lanky, and quiet. He wasn't a gang member, not affiliated with anything beyond the bad luck that got him locked up. On his second night, a senior detainee tapped his bunk and said, "That's not your bed. Move." Chemo hesitated, thinking it was a misunderstanding. But the look in the man's eyes told him it wasn't a request, it was an order. And behind that order was the weight of an entire crew. Beds were currency in these dorms. Food was tribute. Phone access was privilege. Showers were scheduled by hierarchy. Every inch of space came with a rule, enforced not by officers but by inmates who had quietly, methodically built a system that replaced the actual one. Most guards pretended they didn't see what was happening. Some were outnumbered. Some were exhausted. Some simply believed letting the gang run their own dorm kept the violence contained. They handled theirs, one officer whispered to a colleague during a shift change. As long as they don't spill into the hallway, let them. Chemo noticed that logic didn't protect people like him. Every night, lights flickered, shadows shifted, and the dorm became a different kind of prison within Rikers, one where the official rules stopped at the door. The strongest gang in the unit imposed their own system, mandatory rent of commissary snacks, forced work details like cleaning or washing towels, and a brutal code of discipline that didn't need to leave marks for officers to ignore it. He watched a detainee named Oso get dragged into a corner because he used the phone without permission. No shouting. No fight. Just a circle tightening around him until the rest of the dorm turned away. When the officers walked through for count, they didn't ask why Oso wasn't standing straight. They didn't ask anything. By the end of Chemo's first week, he knew he needed protection or he needed a way out. But protection came with strings. And getting out of a gang-run dorm was almost impossible unless something forced the doors open. That something arrived one night in the form of a new detainee who didn't follow the script, and the moment he stepped inside, everything in 3 East shifted. The new arrival called himself Rel. Broad shoulders, a jagged scar down his cheek, and the kind of posture that said he'd seen worse places than Rikers. But what unsettled the dorm wasn't his size, it was the way he walked in without waiting for permission. He didn't stop at the entrance. He didn't scan for the gatekeepers. He went straight to an empty bunk and sat down like he owned it. In a dorm ruled by hierarchy, that was a declaration of war. Chemo felt the air tighten. Moments like this usually ended with someone getting folded. But the gang leader, a wiry older detainee everyone called Bishop, didn't react right away. Instead, he watched Rel with a calm, dangerous curiosity, like a man trying to figure out whether he'd just seen a threat or an opportunity. That night, the dorm didn't sleep. Conversations dropped into whispers. Boots scuffed softly across the floor. Even the officers doing rounds lingered outside the plexiglass window longer than usual, sensing a shift they couldn't explain. The next morning, Bishop made his move. He approached Rel with 2 crew members behind him. He stood over the bunk and asked the question that ran the dorm, "Who vouched for you?" Rel didn't look up. "Didn't know I needed a sponsor to sleep." The room froze. Bishop leaned in closer, his voice a low rasp. "Everybody needs a sponsor here." Rel finally raised his eyes, slow and steady. "Then maybe it's time somebody else set the rules." Nobody breathed. Not even Chemo. But Bishop didn't swing. He didn't shout. He walked away. And that scared the dorm more than a fight ever could. A gang leader avoiding confrontation meant calculations were happening, quiet ones that usually led to loud consequences. Hours later, the dorm saw the ripple effect. Phone lists were rewritten. Showers were rescheduled. Commissary payments suddenly tripled. Bishop was tightening his grip, proving the system was still his. Chemo felt the pressure closing in on everyone outside the gang. People like him were caught between two forces, a leader desperate to show control and a newcomer refusing to play along. That tension built like steam in a locked room. Then came the incident in the hallway. An officer escorted Bishop out for a meeting with administration. Nothing unusual. But 20 minutes later, he returned furious, pacing the dorm with a clenched jaw. Rumors spread fast. Some said the meeting was about contraband. Others said his name came up in an investigation. A few whispered that the officers were finally paying attention to the gang-run dorms. Whatever happened behind that door lit a fuse in Bishop's mind. When he got back, he pulled every member of his crew into a tight circle. No one outside could hear the words, but everyone could feel the intent. Something was about to change, and it wouldn't be subtle. Chemo watched Rel sit on his bunk, calm as ever, like he'd been expecting this moment from the second he arrived. And then, that night, as the lights dimmed and the dorm fell into an uneasy quiet, a single word passed through the room like a spark: lockdown. It wasn't coming from the officers. It was coming from Bishop. And the second the gang moved to enforce it, Chemo realized the dorm wasn't just a mini prison anymore, it was about to turn into a battlefield. The word lockdown carried a different meaning inside a gang-run dorm. In the official sense, it meant officers taking control. But here, in 3 East, it meant the crew was sealing the unit from the inside, deciding who moved, who spoke, and who didn't. Beds scraped the floor as they shifted to block pathways. Voices dropped to low commands. Every detainee who wasn't part of Bishop's circle backed up against their bunks, unsure of what came next. Chemo felt his pulse in his throat. This wasn't chaos. It was preparation. Rel remained seated on his bunk, hands folded, eyes steady. He didn't posture or call out. He just watched the room reshape itself around him. The calm on his face wasn't arrogance, it was intention. Like he knew exactly what this night would bring. Bishop stepped into the center of the dorm and addressed everyone. His tone wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to cut through the tension. "There's things happening upstairs," he said. "People talking. People snitching. This dorm stays tight tonight. Nobody moves unless I say." The message was clear. Whatever the meeting with administration had stirred up, Bishop believed there was a threat inside the unit. And Rel, the lone outsider who never bowed to the structure, suddenly fit too well into that suspicion. The dorm waited for the confrontation. But it didn't come the way anyone expected. Instead, Rel stood up, slow and deliberate. "You don't need to lock down the dorm because of me," he said. "You need to lock it down because they're watching you. They've been watching." Bishop's crew shifted uneasily. Rel continued. "They're not looking for me. They're looking for whoever's been running this place like it's their personal prison. Word is, they're finally cracking down." A murmur rolled through the bunks. Even Chemo felt his mind race. Could that be true? Could the officers, after months of ignoring the power structure, finally be stepping in? Bishop sneered. "You don't know this place." Rel nodded. "Actually, I do. This isn't my first time on this island." He paused. "And last time I was here, the same thing happened. A dorm got too loud. Too organized. Too obvious. Took one person to push it over the edge." The message hit Bishop hard. You could see it in the stiffness of his shoulders. Then Rel added one more line, calm and cold, "And you've been obvious." For the first time, Bishop didn't have an answer. Not a command. Not a threat. Nothing. His own crew glanced around, uncertainty bleeding into their confidence. Nothing was more dangerous in a gang-run dorm than doubt. Outside the plexiglass window, an officer's shadow passed. Then another. Voices echoed from the hallway, short, clipped, urgent. The unit doors seldom saw more than a pair of officers at a time. But now, there were 4, then 6. Chemo's breath caught. The actual lockdown was coming, and this time, it wasn't being led by inmates. When the bolts clanked and the dorm filled with the heavy presence of responding officers, Bishop's empire collapsed in seconds. He was pulled aside for questioning. His crew scattered into stunned silence. The dorm's rigid hierarchy cracked like thin ice. For the first time since Chemo arrived, the unit felt like a part of the Real jail again, not a kingdom ruled by fear. Later, as detainees settled into the new, uneasy normal, Chemo passed Rel and whispered, "Why did you really come here?" Rel didn't smile. Didn't gloat. He simply said, "Some places need someone to shake the walls before they fall on everyone." And in that moment, Chemo understood that not every threat comes to cause damage. Some arrive to reveal it. If you think this story was intense, the next one will leave you speechless. Subscribe for more true crime stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat.